think I'm running out of space on my display board. Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Today we're going to go ahead and talk about spraying a clear coat finish with UV Epoxy Resin. Most people who are already using UV resin either dip their lures into a large container to coat the lure with the resin, or they brush it on. But today we're going to exclusively talk about spraying your resin on with an airbrush and how to prepare that resin, how to thin it, how to prepare your gun. So if that's interesting to you, stick around. So if this is your first time to the channel, my name's Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure designer, and lure builder, and I make these videos to add a little bit of engineering and physics to the art of lure making. Today we're going to talk specifically about applying UV resin with an airbrush. Now you might want to ask yourself, with those two other options, dipping and brushing, available, why spray it on? And you would have a point there because there's a little bit more preparation and a little bit more cleanup at the end. But the reason you might want to use it is because you want to get that really thin, refined, factory kind of finish that you would see on a lure that you would buy from a tackle shop. And here's a little lure that I chose for the demonstration here, and you can clearly see the little tiny scale details, and maintaining those details is really one of the more attractive parts of actually spraying it on and not dipping or brushing it on. Because when you dip and brush, you always get a much thicker coat. And of course, with an airbrush, you can add additional layers and make it a little thicker if you want to, or you can give it that really thin, very refined look that allows all your detailed carvings that maybe you worked hours to put in to still be really clear and visible even after that final coat at the end. So I suppose I should explain what UV resin is. Essentially, it's a one-part UV resin that, instead of being catalyzed chemically, it's catalyzed by exposure to UV light. So that might be exposure to really bright sunlight or exposure to an artificial UV source. I prefer to use epoxy resins as opposed to the polyester resins like the solar res. I just find that it sets a little bit harder, it's a little glossier, and it doesn't smell. So my recommendation is to go with epoxy. And just as a reminder, everything I use, I put a link in the description for. I try to find the most reasonably priced source, and I try to hook you up with that link. So just scroll down through the description and you'll find just about everything I use in this lure shop. So generally, the benefits of using UV epoxy is a very quick cure, but also you don't have to mix anything and you don't have to throw away brushes after you use them. So let's talk a little bit about the airbrush I would recommend you use. For this purpose, I like to use an inexpensive brand of airbrush, and I've been using master airbrushes for years, and I've gone through a lot of them, I won't kid you, but if you take good care of them and clean them gently, they'll last you quite a while, and they're not very expensive to replace. And I recommend you go with one of the set that comes with multiple needles and multiple nozzles. And for this purpose, I would use the largest one on this set. It's a 0.5 millimeter. And I would go with a gun with a slightly larger reservoir than this. And I think I got a link in the description for one of these. I started off using the resin from Alumilite. It's a quality resin and it's available here from the US. It's a little pricier than the stuff coming out of China, which is to be expected. And I find that the stuff that I've been buying from the Chinese sources are pretty good quality. They set up real clear, they set up really hard, and they have a really good sheen, a very shiny finish. So once you've got your resin, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to thin it, because you've got to thin it to spray it through a gun. First, to get a good thin viscosity, the resin has to be at a temperature above 70. I like to warm mine up around 80 degrees, and typically here in Florida, that's not a problem. But in the cool months, like now, I'll warm my resin up with a blow dryer. And that usually only takes a few minutes. You can feel it warm up pretty quickly, and you'll notice a distinct difference in the viscosity. It changes very quickly with a little bit of warmth. But even with warming it, you'll still need to thin the resin down a little bit. And you can use acetone, xylene, lacquer thinner, or what I prefer, denatured alcohol. which is simply ethanol. Now, while all these are usable with epoxy resin, I would caution against using xylene. It's pretty nasty stuff, and unless you're clear coating something very large, it wouldn't be worthwhile using xylene, and you definitely have to use a professional quality respirator. Acetone works pretty well. What I don't like about acetone is that it evaporates just a little too fast for this kind of application, so you'll find yourself having to add just a little more to your mixture as you go along. Lacquer thinner works pretty well, but I put it along with the xylene, just a little too smelly for my shop. The denatured alcohol is just a little safer to work with. It doesn't evaporate as fast, and I just feel a little more comfortable using it in the shop. Now, your mixing ratio is going to be dependent on how much you're going to put on to your lure at one time. I like to have a kind of a medium coat. I don't want a coating that's just a few microns. I want something that's substantial enough to protect the lure, but not so thick that it'll obscure all the details. So what I found that works really well, somewhere between 15 to 20%. And typically I use a 17% mix. 17% denatured alcohol, 83% UV. And that looks like it would be a little difficult to measure out. But if you pour 10 milliliters of UV into a little graduated cup and then 2 milliliters of denatured alcohol, that'll give you a 17 to 83% mix. Or pretty close to it. It's like 16.6% alcohol. But if you prefer, like me, to measure by weight, I went ahead and looked up the specific gravity of both the alcohol and the epoxy. I did a little bit of calculating. And if you add 0.15 grams of denatured alcohol to every gram of UV resin, you get the same ratio for your thinning. And this makes it a lot easier to mix very small batches, especially if you only have one lure, which at that point you're probably only going to want about 5 grams of total mix. So if you have 5 grams of UV, you just multiply that times 0.15, and that gives you the amount to add of the denatured alcohol. So let's go ahead and mix that up and do it. You need a little gram scale and something to mix it in. You don't have to use a graduated cup. You can just use a little Dixie cup. And we'll zero the gram scale out. So we're going for 5 grams of UV resin. Now I'm only doing one lure, so I could probably get away with less than 5 grams, but I think it's a little easier to see. And that should be close enough, 4.97. Now I'm going to zero it again, and we'll add 0.75 grams. And that's close enough, 0.74, and it's just a matter of getting it mixed up. Now you can see it runs off the stick pretty easily. It's still kind of cold in here, so I'm going to warm this up with the blow dryer as well. You should take a little bit of denatured alcohol on a rag and wipe down your lure really thoroughly. Make sure there's no oils on it. No matter what process you use to put the resin on, you'll get fish eyes if it's not perfectly clean. So the other real nice benefit to using this stuff is that I don't really have to rush to get this clean, because it's not going to set up on me, and it won't set up unless it's exposed to UV light. And I'm going to be spraying this little very inexpensive little store brand lure, and I picked this because of the very fine details it has, and I want to show the difference. So I'm going to spray this one, and then I'm going to do the second one with a brush, and we'll see how different they look. And I'm going to set my airbrush pressure to 40 psi. And if you don't have a good extractor in your painting shop, you should probably put one in. But either way, certainly wear a respirator. I'm going to write spray on this. And we'll close that up and turn the lights on. And I'm going to be dipping straight out of the bottle. And I made sure my brush was nice and clean so I don't introduce any dust to the bottle. And I'll try to make a thin coat of it. Does end up looking really shimmery. Alright, let's put this thing in the chamber. All right, it's been about 45 minutes. Let's go ahead and get them out. All right, the difference is pretty subtle, but it's real. Let me see if I can get some better lighting and a better background, and I'll show you what I mean. All right, so here they are. This is the spray one, and you can see how sharp the little scales are still. If you look at this one, they're a little less sharp, especially near where it curves around the back. They're just not quite as crisp. You can see it on this side a little clearer how the resin is a little thicker and sort of obscures those details. And on this one, they're just a little sharper. And it really would be a much more obvious difference if we were looking at small micro lures or some small item of like craft work. Anyway, if you're interested in the UV clear resin topic, certainly check out my playlist on the channel. I put a lot of information in those videos and you might find them helpful. Thanks to everyone who watched it this far. Leave me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. And if you find the information useful, subscribe. It really helps the channel out. All right, well, I'm hoping to get a fishing video up in the next week or so, so keep an eye out for that. Until then, I'll see you guys next Friday. Put 10 millimeter, the information of UV resin.